Okay. The short fiction story that I'm reading is called If Only Fish Could Speak. If only fish could speak, I'd hear Grandpa's voice one last time. The deep rasp from the three packs of cigarettes he used to smoke, intruding above my mother's voice like a bee in my ear. I'd hear him say Junior or Buddy with a smile that folded his cheeks into one another, knowing he sought me and no one else. Grandpa first smoked at 16 when his friend Donnie grabbed a bud off the sidewalk. The cigarette lay limp on the concrete, temptingly flaring a dim light. Donnie, a veteran smoker, had smoked since he was 14. He stole cigarettes from his mother's ashtrays and hid inside the shed with the lighter in one hand and the cigarette in the other, holding it tightly between his index and middle fingers. Grandpa told me how Donnie offered him cigarettes all the time, but he'd never give in because he feared the possibility of cancer and his lungs shrinking into raisins. That day, Donnie ran toward the barely lit cigarette, grabbed it, and wrapped his arm around Grandpa. Grandpa ended up taking a hit out of pure annoyance. He hated that he gave in after all his talk about saying no to drugs. The smoke floated inside his mouth, coating the inside of his cheeks and sticking to the plaque around his gums. He took a deep breath in, and the smoke slid down his trachea and then down his lungs, which instantly rejected the nicotine. He tried keeping the smoke in as long as he could, like when you're around a crowd and you need to let out a big cough, but his chest began palpitating. He placed his hand on his throat and coughed up everything inside his lungs. Done. I did it and never again, said Grandpa, gasping for air and wiping away his tears. Little did Grandpa know he'd follow Donnie to the back of his shed the week after and try it one more time, which led to every other week, which turned to every week. Whenever Grandpa took me down to the lake, he'd tell me these stories and always end them with the lesson about how smoking makes you slow and dumb. Even if the lessons change, he'd always say, Buddy, never let a fool influence you just because they're a fool. I sat there at 6 years old trying to understand how smoking works, at 9 knowing the anatomy of a cigarette, at 18 trying one on my own. Grandpa would tell the same stories over and over again, but he always added something new as if he'd been trying to piece the memory together. The night before my 10th birthday, Grandpa called to confirm our fishing trip and sleepover. I packed my duffel bag with all my gear in it. In the morning, I woke to the buzzer and ran into Grandpa's room to shake him awake. Grandpa despised alarm clocks with all their yaps and violent wake-up calls, so he always rely on Grandma or me to wake him. Without a doubt, he always sprang up at a 90-degree angle and let in the biggest gasp, hoarding in the air and sighing as soon as he saw me. Once I managed to get him out of bed, we walked pigeon-toed to the bathroom, brushed our teeth, combed our hair, and winked at our reflections. Grandpa's gentleness is what I missed the most. He'd comb down my thick black hair to the side just like his, but with a little more water and gel, and moisturize my elbows and dry hands with his calloused palms. After getting our skin hydrated, we went downstairs, passing through the halls filled with pictures of my mom and her two other siblings. Grandpa fixed his eyes at the picture of Uncle Roy and back at me, telling me how I looked just like him, nose and everything. Once we made it down to the kitchen, I'd run to the pantry to grab some Cheez-Its, granola bars, Grandpa's sunflower seeds, and our packed lunches. Grandpa grabbed our lures, reels, fishing rods, and more tools and loaded the truck. Grandma kissed both of us before we left, and on this particular day, she cuffed my hands together and looked me in the eyes with hers, and stared at me while I stared at the constellations of moles under her eyes and cheeks. She came close to my ear and whispered, "Take care of Grandpa. He's old and stiff and has no sense to take a break. Help him out with your strong arms. Okay, Junior?" At the time, I wanted to ask what a 10-year-old boy could do that a 50-year-old man couldn't, but I simply nodded and said, "I'll do my best." Grandpa scoffed at the whisper that could purposely be heard. "I'm fine, Maria. I can take care of myself." He stared at me with his lips pinched together. At the end of their love war, we entered his Ford truck, waved our hands like royals, and began our route to Lake Roland. By the time we made it to Lake Roland, we drove through a tunnel of large trees with red maple and pignut hickory leaves falling onto the windshield. Grandpa and I sat in silence with our windows rolled down, taking in every sound of heron splashing into the water and visual euphoria. Entering the lake transported us into a dimension where tranquility is the sole feeling in your body, numbing your toes and fingers, slowing down your heartbeat, and a sudden sense of gratitude for everything around you. After filling our lungs with cool air that brushed along our nose hairs, we breathed out and began setting out our fishing rods and attaching our hooks to the line. Grandpa swung his rod back toward the top of his shoulder and out toward the water in a delicate yet powerful motion. We passed the time raiding our snack bags and talking about the weather. Soon later, Grandpa caught a bluegill that I always thought had more green than blue. Buddy, did you know if you whisper into a fish's gill, they capture a voice? I scrunched my eyebrows together and laughed as Grandpa held the jittery fish. Son, does it look like I'm laughing along? You can't grow up and stop imagining. If you believe they can, they will. My father told me long before he fell underground, fish have a keen sense of vibrations. Grandpa started whispering into the fish's gill as the other fishermen stared at him in disbelief. Hey, buddy, he said to the fish, it's Grandpa. I love you deeper than the ocean and more than the number of creatures in it. Grandpa's proud of you and misses your small hands and toothless smile. I'm the toothless one now. Can you believe it? I can't wait to see you fish with your little ones and teach them to fish like I once did to you. Grandpa smiles more and cries less because of you. I hope you catch my voice one day and hear this. The entire time he whispered, I could hear him in and out, and surprisingly, the fish stayed in his hands. My organs coiled together out of embarrassment as people stared at Grandpa. I wonder if I listened more closely, would I still be looking for this bluegill today? Grandpa passed away a month later. The morning of our last fishing trip, he fell to the ground in his house, trying to locate the air he'd wake up to every morning. He kneeled hard, grabbing onto the headboard of his bed and turning a bright red that wasn't one out of embarrassment or rage, but of suffocation. He collapsed. Grandma and I came in screaming for help, strength, and a miracle. An ambulance came in to our tranquil oasis, pulling my grandpa out of it. He stayed in the hospital for 3 weeks before they let us know he didn't make it. If fish could speak, I'd possibly hear Grandpa's voice one last time. I'd easily imagine his smile, moles, and his toothless grin. I'd hear everything he said to the bluegill one more time and write every word from beginning to end. Now, every Friday, I cast my line into the water and fill my hands with a coat of slime from all the bluegills I catch. My daughter stands next to me with her reel while Grandma watches from a distance, hoping for Grandpa's voice to be really in it. If only fish could speak.
This was such a beautiful and sweet story. I knew where it was going and it still made me sad at the end. And like what a great title. So to a question, but I really like how you're able to capture like the magic of this experience and also like the youth of this man who he's so vivid, you know, and I can imagine them like winking at themselves. That's such a cute thing that they're copying each other in the mirror. My question is this in any way inspired by your grandpa?
Actually, no. I wish it was. I think honestly, when I create these characters, I'm listening to music, and the first thing that comes to my mind, I kind of go with it. And so I don't know. When I went, because this is inspired off of Lake Roland. This is for a class that I took with Jane DeLury, and we were going around Baltimore. And for one of our projects, it was focused on picking anywhere in Baltimore, researching it. And so I went to Lake Roland, and I saw that there were tons of fishermen. And so I was just thinking, I'm like, okay, like it's so sweet thinking of like a grandson and a grandfather fishing together. And so that's kind of how I went through it. I never really knew my grandparents, so. I think it's nice writing about something that like, oh, this could have been what it felt like. Yeah. Thank you.